Gallo. I'm the CEO of Cafe J, and it's the Community Alliance for Family and Justice Education. It's a collaborative between the Criminal Justice Department at Southwestern and the Family Studies Department. And we joined together to create a nonprofit organization to do activities and events like this. And I have two special guests today. One is a shout out to Angie Holcomb, who is my aunt in Georgia, who's joining us today, and also the vice president of the college joined us today. I'd like to introduce Vice President Saber.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gallo. Good morning and welcome. I'm just so glad and honored to be here and be part of this very, very special event on campus. We have so much respect for our justice impacted students, and we serve a large community at Donovan. And this year we had the very first graduation ceremony at Donovan. That was incredibly special. And I'm just so glad to have our guest here today and what Cafe J does in terms of bringing the community together and making sure that second chances are given to all our students and our community so that they can re-enter society and have productive, meaningful lives with their family and community. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to introduce Shawn, who is our keynote speaker today. After enduring 16 years of incarceration, Shawn overcame early challenges to graduate with honors from Southwestern College and is now pursuing a sociology degree at UC Irvine. He serves as the project coordinator for the Irvine Valley College Rising Scholars Program. He champions educational equity and social justice. Esteemed as an author, Shawn's writing spotlights somatic issues like the school to prison pipeline, and his resilience and dedication inspires others. I'd like to introduce Shawn as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Good morning. So happy that you all get to join us in this moment. I'm honored to be here. It's nice to be an alum of Southwestern Community College and be invited back to share my story, especially if it's going to have an impact on future students, our current students, or even family members that are supporting students here at our college. Love Southwestern College. It's involved in a lot of activities in our community, whether it's going out and cleaning up parks, providing meals to families, going into a prison and supporting students. That's what our campus does. It's bigger than just this location. We have a campus down in San Ysidro. We have a campus in National City. So we're a part of South San Diego, and we do a lot for the community. So you should be proud of yourselves as a Southwestern College student, employee, or a family member of a student or employee that goes here. So for my story, I want to start out with sharing that recently, what I've been hearing from my church that I attend is that the world is a chaotic place. And I opened up my first presentation this morning by letting people know that I don't view it that way. I believe that there is order behind the chaos that we see in the world. I believe that institutions are in place, decisions are made, which leads to the chaos, which tells me that when we could identify what is leading to chaos, we don't live in a chaotic world. We live in an organized world, and we can go back and make those improvements so that we don't have people feeling like they're so chaotic, because that suggests that we are helpless and that there's nothing we can do and it's beyond our control. But that is not true. That is not what I believe. So I wanted to share that with you as I open up. So this is the Family and Education Conference. And when I speak about mothers, I have to talk about my mother. So even if you don't personally have a mother, the idea and the symbol of a mother can provide you with a will to overcome any challenge that you may face. And I want you to keep that in mind, that a mother, or the idea of a mother, symbol of a mother, can assist you with finding a will to overcome. Sometimes we're not always able to muster up our own will to overcome, but that support from family, or the idea of family support, can be what you need to overcome anything, and I mean absolutely anything. So for my mother, she was a single white mother, and she was living in the jungles in Los Angeles. And the jungles is the term that we all know it by. It's located in Baldwin Hills, but it's not up in the nice mansion portion where they have nice homes in Baldwin Hills. It's the apartment communities that are down below. It's next to South Central. In this area, there's a dominant gang that developed and formed, which is responsible for most of the experiences that youth growing up in these communities are going to be exposed to. They have their own rules, regulations, and expectations for youth growing up in this community in particular. So this was the end of the 80s and into the 90s. When my mom would go to work, she worked for Teledyne, which is in Marina Del Rey. And when she would go to work, sometimes mothers would come to work and they would break down on the floor of Teledyne, and they would start crying, and they would be like, my son was murdered, or my son was arrested for murder. So she remembers hearing this, and this was part of her trauma working and living in Los Angeles in the 90s, was that society didn't feel safe for her co-workers' children and for her children. She had my sister who's 5 years older than me, and she had me who was attending preschool and kindergarten in the jungles. So she had these worries like, what will be the outcome for my children? So she was thinking of ways to leave potentially. And the way she got here was my father. My father was addicted to heroin, and he would tend to move the family wherever he could be close to his heroin, which I remember as a young child, they would identify as his medicine. So he felt like this environment in the jungles was a nice place to easily have access to his heroin, got us in this low-income apartment. The problem was he continually was getting incarcerated for burglaries and thefts. So he would be absent. He would move my mom. First they moved to Venice Beach, then they moved to West Adams, then they moved to the jungles. But he would always get incarcerated after the move, leaving her by herself in these environments. And this is where she found herself when the Rodney King riots occurred. So during the Rodney King riots, she just locked herself in the apartment. She watched the news. She watched as the neighborhood was on fire, and she was scared. And it wasn't necessarily her neighbors she was scared of. She always tells me to this day, that was the only community she ever lived in that felt like a community. All of the neighbors looked out for each other. They brought each other food. They watched each other's kids. I was babysat in the apartment upstairs by the Hispanic family. They let me watch cartoons and eat cereal, which was nice. There was community here. But there was also an instance where law enforcement made a decision which had a negative outcome. So the decision that that particular group of law enforcement made was offensive to the entire community. And then the outcome was an act of aggression and violence, which we saw, which ultimately was my mom's final straw. She was like, you know what? I'm going to move. And my father had identified that in Riverside County, they were building tract homes. In these tract homes, a lot of people were migrating from Los Angeles at this time. And still to this day, you find a lot of people leave Los Angeles and they go to the Inland Empire for their cheaper homes. So the price to pay for her apartment to rent it was the same price she paid on her mortgage for a brand new 2-story home in Paris, California. So they built these tract homes. It was a $90,000 tract home at this time in the 90s. And the riots happened. The next day, she's packing up her little van. She's like, we're leaving. We had a neighbor. She always shares a story on how our neighbor recently immigrated from Asia. He was murdered by the National Guard during the riots. And he just wasn't familiar with the community yet, the culture. He just moved and immigrated. So he's out. The National Guard is being very violent at this time, shooting people. They have martial law. So that was another factor. She just had all these factors that told her move, move, move. What happened was when she moved, she maintained her job in Los Angeles. So what this created for me and my sister is that 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, she would leave at either 3:30, 4:30 in the morning. She would be gone. By the time we woke up, our mom was gone, and this would be 5 days a week. She didn't get home till around 5 or 5:30 every night. So what happens is that having a father that is in and out of jail, at this point in my life, I hadn't had many interactions with him. A mother that's continually working with the idea of protecting her family, but commuting a long distance, creating an absence that it was just me and my sister. And it's an absence that's going to get filled one way or another. And for me, that drew me to connecting with individuals in my community. And even though we moved to Paris, California to avoid the gang violence of the 90s, a gang formed in my community in 1996. It just happened to be a Crip gang. And what happens was when they formed, they started developing rules and structures of behaviors in this community. It was not popular to wear red. So growing up, you didn't want to walk around in a red t-shirt. You were either going to get picked on, and even if you weren't, it wasn't like violence. No one wanted to walk out the door every day and feel like you would have everybody's eyes on you, because if they felt like it was a level of disrespect, it can cause harm to you. So these were some guiding principles I started learning as a child. By the time I was 8, I met a kid from the neighborhood known as Dizzy Devil. And to me, Dizzy Devil looked so cool because I would watch music videos. I'd watch Eazy-E, NWA, Bone Thugs and Harmony. And to me, the guys in my neighborhood represented what these guys were doing. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So I remember meeting Dizzy, and I thought it was so cool to walk around with an adult who happens to be a gang member. And he was briefly sharing about what he does with me. He told me his gang name. He told me the name of the gang. He just made it sound cool. So even at 8, I was already exposed to potentially associating with the guys who were in my neighborhood in school. So in the 2nd grade, I was at a point where I still was not caught up with the rest of my class. So even prior, 1st grade, kindergarten, kids were already learning how to read. They were already learning how to write. And I didn't have that ability yet. So in the 2nd grade, we had this really aggressive teacher, and he didn't help because his demeanor was always really assertive and really punitive. And he would get in front of the classroom and basically tell you about yourself as a kid. He shouldn't have been a 2nd grade teacher. But I had a friend, his name was Booney. He was playing with another kid and he was pushing him out of his chair. They were laughing. They were like going back and forth, pushing each other. So our teacher, he comes and violently shoves Booney out of his chair in the 2nd grade and throws him into the wall. Booney gets kicked out of the class. He doesn't have protection. An adult just came, physically assaulted this young kid. And I'm seeing this in 2nd grade. So I feel like I'm going to make it my mission to challenge this teacher. And for the rest of my time before I was kicked out, I used to always be a class clown. I never did any work. And it culminated when the principal came, gave a speech to our class. And when she was leaving, the teacher, I'm not going to say his name, but he went back in front of the class and I flipped him off. And the whole class was like laughing. They thought it was the funniest thing. Some kids were like, oh my God, what just happened? But I got kicked out. So I got sent to the principal's office. I couldn't go back to his 2nd grade class. By the time 3rd grade came, I was given a gift that would change my life. And thank God I got it in 3rd grade, or I might not have ever acquired it until years later. So in the 3rd grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Gearling. And one of her strategies was, prior to her class, when I was in 2nd grade, I never got to go to recess. When recess would come, I would have to sit at the tables. And what Mrs. Gearling did was like, okay, instead of punishing you, I'm going to teach you how to read. So she would sit down with me every recess and teach me how to read. And that was a gift that has propelled me even to adulthood that she gave me in 3rd grade that I could have missed had I not had that teacher. And that highlights the importance of the way your teachers are teaching your children, even as young as elementary school. So as I go on to 4th grade, 5th grade, I missed my 3rd grade teacher. I stopped doing work. 4th and 5th grade, not paying attention in class, still getting banned from recess. I'm learning how to fight at this point. I'm fighting other kids. I'm becoming a bully myself. Prior, I used to always get into it with kids. I was never scared to talk about kids, even if they were intimidating. So there was times where I almost got jumped because I was talking about a group of kids. But then when they came to jump me, I would cry and I'd be scared. So I was acting up and learning how to be aggressive, but I also wasn't the biggest and baddest kid. So in the 4th and the 5th grade, I had fights where I would try to be a bully. I took a kid's glasses. He was bigger than me, so he pushed me down. There was another kid, he just immigrated to our country. I was making fun of him. He kicked me in the forehead, and I walked around with like a boot print on my forehead for like a week. There was another kid, I was talking stuff to him, and he pushed me down the stairs. So there was moments where I was trying to be like a bully and learning how to do it because that was kind of our environment. When I would go outside to play in the neighborhood, the kids were bullies. Like, you had the older kids, and if the younger kids were out, it was a game for them. They would chase you down, beat you down. Like, it was fun for them to say that they chased you down and beat you up. So for us, we were always running from the bigger kids in our neighborhood anyway. So I was doing that at school as well. It wasn't until 6th grade that I met my official gang affiliated kids. So in 6th grade, the Southsider gang had already planted roots in 6th grade. They already had members that were becoming from the gang. The Crips gangs were not recruiting yet in 6th grade, but you had some present from LA and Compton. So I was learning what they were doing. And I was also fighting through 6th grade. So I got in 3 fights in 6th grade and I was kicked out. I couldn't finish my last 2 weeks of 6th grade. And in my community, 6th grade was separate from 7th and 8th. They only had one school for all the 6th graders. So getting in trouble, getting kicked out, I go into middle school. When I go to middle school, I make the decision that I'm going to play sports and try to do good. I'm going to try not to fight. Kids are bigger. You get to middle school, you got 8th graders and you're like, oh man, these dudes are like, they're big. And then you also have more gang activity. I had my first friend from my neighborhood from the Crip gang that was going to middle school and he was in 8th grade. I had, we became friends because he lived in my neighborhood and that was our common bond that drew us to feel like we should have each other's back because we went to school in another area which was dominated by the Hispanic gang and they also had the rival Crips who lived over there. But the Hispanic gang had a presence at this middle school. They would hang out by the handball courts. And they were bigger too. You had a lot of 8th graders there and they had a clique. No one messed with them. Everybody knew what they belonged to and you kind of knew to let them do their thing. So I'm still in 7th grade. I'm coming in. I'm trying out for the football team. I reach out to my friends from 6th grade that I did have and I'm like, hey, could you guys try out for the football team? Because I'm trying out, but I know absolutely nobody on the team. Like you should come and we could kick it and we could do this together. And what happened was my friends were like, bro, I can't. Like we get drug tested and I'm smoking weed. So I remember hearing that and thinking like, oh, that's not cool. I'm like, why are you smoking weed? Like, that's not a cool thing. So I'm going to go by myself and try to do it by myself. So I started isolating myself, working out with the football team, still not making much friends, but I was a class clown. And I was listening to a lot of Slim Shady and Eminem. And I never like to argue that music influences people's behavior and decisions. But I can say for me, as I listened to Slim Shady, I was loving his music and I was always acting up. So one of his songs was, You Don't Want to Mess with Shady. And I remixed it to include my name. So I got up in front of the class and I was like, you don't want to mess with Shawnee, because Shawnee will bleep, 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 bleep. And then the whole class like laughed, right? The only one who didn't laugh was the gang member that was in my class. That was from the Hispanic gang. And I remember being embarrassed by him. Like in particular, he's pretty much the coolest kid in the class. I had the most status. So I approached him violently and I slapped him and he didn't respond. I expected him to respond, but my action of being violent and slapping him got me kicked out of the class, and him not responding made me think the gang was going to jump me now. So I was thinking, oh shoot, maybe he's going to go back to his homies and tell them, and then they're going to jump me. And so I get kicked out. But before that, as I start seeing the gang, like in the coming days, they don't jump me. So he probably didn't tell him, but it was a fear I had to live with now. Like my actions, what did I do that's going to lead to me getting jumped? But nothing did come of that, thank God. So he might not have told him, or that wasn't important. Like it might've been embarrassing for him to share that fact. So I went to a class, which our middle school had called the Phoenix class. And the idea was that you take all the kids who get in trouble, you put them in the same class. And this created a sort of prison in the middle school. So we could no longer go eat with the rest of the student population. So when they would have their lunch break, we would be in class. When they left, we would get to go. And there was only like 40 of us. But also in this class, you had 8th graders. So now I'm bringing my 6th grade, 7th grade mentality into middle school. I now have the 8th graders on the verge of going to high school, and they're a little more advanced in what they're doing. I meet this 8th grade kid named Juan. He's already smoking weed. One of the things we had in common is that we both stole from stores. My reason for stealing from stores was to get candy. I would steal from stores, I would eat candy, or I would sell candy to my peers at school. His reason for stealing from stores was to buy weed. So 2 different reasons, but we had a common bond. So I connect with Juan. So now I start getting home from school late. Instead of getting off at my bus stop, I get off about 3 stops early. So me and Juan walk, we start getting high, and then we finally get home. And this was a major transition for me because now instead of stealing, which I was stealing for as long as I could remember. At some point, I don't know when it developed, but I just became a kleptomaniac. Like I would steal candy and it was just it. But I also thought that it wasn't hurting anybody. I always thought it was a victimless crime, even as a child. I thought there was like an abundance of everything. I thought money like came, when I see my mom get money out of an ATM, I just imagined that it was free. I never knew the hard work people put into for material things. So I just couldn't conceive necessarily how much harm I was doing. So I was still acting out in this fashion, and that was a part of my character. So now I started doing it to get marijuana. And what happened was my level of criminality started increasing even in 7th grade. Because to get the marijuana, now I started associating with the gang in my community directly who had weed, but also the gang members in another set of apartments who had weed, who were coming from Compton and Watts. I was making friends with adults. I was a 7th grader in their living room with their kids buying weed from them and talking to them. And it was interesting to look back at it as an adult. It seems like nonsense, but for the 90s, it was normal, and into the 2000s. So this is my experience. At the continuation, okay, so in middle school, I go to the Phoenix class. We get kicked out for stealing from lockers. We get sent to our continuation school, which is a mix of 7th through 12th graders. The only way we're separate is 7th and 8th grade. We go to all our classes together. But at lunchtime, you have to go. This is like a prison within a school, pretty much, this continuation school. You have to go to a yard. They have handball courts and basketball courts. To me, similar to a prison. You had the dominant Southsider gang. You already had kids with bald heads tatted up. Not everybody was the stereotypical look, but you had a lot of the stereotypical look posted up on this wall. And it was clear to know that this gang, it was in their neighborhood. They had the dominant culture here. So a lot of their rules were in place. You couldn't wear LA Dodger hats. You couldn't wear anything with LA paraphernalia. They seen it as a sign of disrespect, and they would politely ask you to remove it. And as long as the kid removed it, they would be fine. If you didn't, you would get jumped. So that was known at this school. And then the two black gangs, you had the Paris Low Crips, and then the neighborhood Crips where I lived stayed separate because they were rivals. So you had the black faction separate, you had the Mexicans separate over here in the corner, and then pretty much other kids just came and went, but you were at the mercy of what they wanted to do. And there was a lot of racism against whites at this school. You had one white kid crying to his mom because he was walking through the field to school, and then a black girl like tackled him and was threatening him and like did reverse racism. And it was interesting. There was a very interesting dynamic at this school. Another white kid was taken to a corner and he was like pummeled just for being white. So at this school, that was my experience there. I don't last long because my friends from middle school who I met in the Phoenix class, who I got expelled with, they came with me. And then the kid who's from my neighborhood who happened to be a Crip, he's really big at this time. He's already well developed. He gets in a fight with a kid, he picks him up, slams him on the head, and the kid leaves in the ambulance. He gets sent to a probation school. And at my community, after continuation school, you got probation school. That's like your last line before a juvenile hall potentially. So he goes there. I'm left with one. We decide to steal from the student store. We get caught, we get expelled, we go to probation school. So at probation school, there's only 2 classrooms. It reminds me just like this. If you put a wall down the middle, this is classroom 1, this is classroom 2. You have all, and now you're mixed. So 7th through 12th grade, it doesn't matter. You're all in the same classroom and you're on the verge of being on probation if you're not already on probation. So you have classroom 1 would go eat first, and they would just send you to Jack in the Box or a local store. And this class would wait. Once you came back, they would go out, and then one class would go to the library, and then you switch. So that was pretty much our program. But when you go out, every lunch you're getting high. Every lunch you're kicking it with active gang members who aren't in school, even adults who are posted up by the stores. So I developed a strong relationship with a friend named Powder Blue and a friend named Little Dizzy. And Mark was also there, but he was in the other classroom. These guys were from my neighborhood. So that's what drew me to kick it with them. Because by this time I was associating with the gang in my neighborhood a little more, going to the park, going to meetings. But Powder Blue and Little Dizzy always had fights with the rival Crips. There was a guy named Buzz, named after Buzz Lightyear. And then there was like OGs who weren't even in our class that would show up. So they would have fights when we would go out to lunch. And after one of those fights, I'm back. This is after school. I'm walking up to where we kick it in the neighborhood, and they had came and they had jumped Powder Blue, one of my friends from the classroom. He was bleeding. And I remember asking the big homie Dizzy, like, how did he just, like, why is he bleeding if you're all here? And I know you got weapons all the time. And he was like, man, he dropped his weapon and went in the street to fight these guys, and they jumped him. I had to pick up the gun. So I let him get jumped because I felt like what he did was stupid. We could have got shot. So this was my first inkling, like, maybe this gang stuff ain't so cool. Like, maybe people aren't so loyal. So I had a little bit of doubt, like, now, if I was fully going to be involved and get jumped in myself eventually. That was the first sign of doubt. In 7th grade, I stopped going. So by not going, I get kicked out. I'm not keeping up attendance, so they officially kicked me out. So from 7th to 9th grade, I didn't have a school to go to in my community. My mom enrolled me in an online school in Moreno Valley, and she would do some of the work from like now and then. So I didn't do any work. I wasn't doing any work. I was going to gang meetings. I got a gang nickname. I was learning about the politics. I never got jumped in, but every time they were going to jump me in, there was 2 younger members. It was Baby Deuce and Powder Blue. They were always the one tasked with it. So they would ask me like, are you ready? You know, this could be the day. They had meetings about it. And I was like, nah, man, I'm cool. And there was little things that kept me from doing it. I remember one of the first bits of education I got is that I couldn't say the N-word amongst my group because I'm Egyptian and white. And it's a predominantly, well, it was an all Black gang. So it was a big issue to jump somebody in who's mixed. But my friends that were close to me said, you could use the N-word with us, but just don't use it with so-and-so because that's going to cause you an issue. So I was like, I'm not going to use it at all. So I had to entirely deleted it from potentially being used in my vocabulary, which benefited me later on. But it was while being out of school, associating with this gang, trying to get acclimated to education again. By the 9th grade, my mom tried to enroll me in the regular high school, and I thought there was a glimmer of hope that I was smoking weed every day, mind you. So from 12 to 15, I smoked weed every day. So there was a glimmer of hope that I could leave this alone, go back to high school, potentially play basketball or football. We go to the school district, and they say because of my record, I'm not allowed to go back to regular high school by the time of 9th grade. They said they'll give me a chance to go back to the continuation school. So I knew that wasn't going to work. It didn't work. Within 2 weeks, kicked out again. So now I'm just full-time in the community. My mom enrolls me in another homeschool, and this is a little community called Nuevo next to Paris. It's like a Christian school. So this was going to be potentially a solution. But what happened was I just wasn't engaged. And I knew everybody in my neighborhood who belonged to our particular gang, who belonged to the rival gangs, who were coming from out of our community and operating. So I was really familiar with the streets. And it was during one of those periods that 2 young Hispanic kids, aged 16 and 18, they decide to rob a house in my community. And they're in our neighborhood, so they're pretty much in our territory. Our older individuals were rivals at this point, but because we're so young, we get away with intermingling. We don't have the same issues that the adults from our neighborhoods necessarily have. So we see them. I know them personally. I'm like, man, I tell my friend Mark, who's 18, I'm 15 years old at this time. I'm like, hey, let's go see if we can get some weed from them or see what they're doing. We walk to follow them, and our neighborhood is pretty compact. It's not hard to run into each other or be on other people's property, but they go straight to a house. And this house is known to have weapons. Everybody in the community knows about it. It's been robbed prior and people have stole guns. So they go to this house. We automatically think, oh, they're going to burglarize this target house. Let's keep going. We walk off down the street. Mark suggests going back. So Mark's like, you know what? Let's just go back. We don't have any weed. We don't have any money. They're in our neighborhood. Let's go find out what they're doing. I was like, all right, Mark, let's go. We go back. We look. They're still at the front door. So we go stand off to the side of the street. We see 2 other kids across the street who we know. They're gang members from Los Angeles who moved to Paris. So we're not too worried about them. We're just like, whatever. We go and look again, and they disappear from the front door. So we think they're sneaking in. We're thinking like, oh man, they snuck into this house. They're going to go try to get something. I was like, let's try to sneak in too. Let's see what we could do. So and to us, this was completely normalized. Not only was my house burglarized repeatedly, but I had already been exposed to potentially burglarizing homes where no one was home. It wasn't an idea where you would go into somebody's occupied house. It was more of the idea that if you could get away with stealing something and potentially run away, that was the level of criminality I was at this point. But what happens is while we're trying to sneak in, the gates open, we go through the back, we go up to the back slider, we try it, it's locked. I'm already like not sure about this whole situation. So I'm like, maybe we should just leave and go to our other friend's house. So I go to leave. Mark is he's 17. He's already a pretty big kid. He stays at the door. I'm like 5'7", 120 pounds. But Mark stays there and he's like, no, man. He knocks. He's like, wait and see if they come. And I see him and I'm like, all right, I'll go back, with you. Since you're not leaving, I'm not going to leave you. I go back. When I get back to the slider, he's like, oh, they're coming. The door opens and the 18-year-old, he grabs me by the shirt and he yanks me in violently. And he's like, is this what the F you wanted to see? He lifts up his shirt. He has a gun. So I noticed that. He shows me the homeowner. So when they enter the home, they attack the homeowner. So this was something that I didn't necessarily expect. But when I seen it at this point in my life, I lacked compassion on the level where if I see somebody hurt, I know instant. It's not like you don't know to go get them help. Your conscience will tell you get somebody help. but I was criminalized at this point to where my mind was, no, these aren't the protocols. The protocols are get away and don't get in trouble and don't get caught. So my first thought was, I don't want these guys killing me. They just hurt this homeowner. How do I still function with them where they don't think I'm going to snitch on them? So I see candy on the counter. I run, I grab the candy, and I run back out of the house. Mark follows me. We start walking down the street. I turn to Mark. It's just me and him. And I'm like, bro, what the heck? I was like, he's going to get up and call the police on us. And Mark looks at me and he's like, no, Shawn, he's dead. And I was like, he's dead. It just would not register. There was nothing in my mind that told me that I just went and was a part of something where somebody was dead. It just would not register at all. So I keep fighting with him on this point. We get about a block away and they pull up in the victim's car and they come up aggressively and they're like, get in. So still, we're not wanting to seem like an outsider. Prior to this, we had a witness in our community have their door chopped down by a chainsaw. So we know that you're putting your family's life in danger by actively going against the street code where we live. So we get in the car. We're still playing along. I'm thinking I want to be away from them, but I'm also trying to fit in. And I'm trying to also not like process what I just experienced. So I'm like, all right, could you guys drop us off? Before I could even finish, the driver explodes. He gets angry. He's like, shut the F up. He's like, I just crashed into somebody before I picked you up. So I'm like, oh my God, like what's going on? I look back, someone's following us. They come up with this plot to shoot at the person that's following us. So he asks the passenger to check a gun. He accidentally shoots the gun, which enrages the driver and which sends all of our attention, just checking my time, sends like everybody's attention on high alert. And they make the decision to shoot at this car, pull into a driveway, shoot at that car speeds off. They get back in, we're still in the back. He pulls up to a stop sign and one of the kids makes a decision to get rid of everybody. He doesn't want any witnesses. So he starts like systematically trying to shoot all of us, but he ends up hitting one of us first. He shoots out the back window and runs out of bullets. So I get the opportunity to run home. And I had been running through my community from whether it's law enforcement or rival gang members. I've learned to jump fences and navigate to get away from cars. Once you jump a set of fences, the car has to go all the way around the block. So this benefited me. And I safely got home having that street knowledge. When I get home, I turn into a little kid. It was amazing how my mom has always, even though she was gone at work, she still existed. She came home every night. She was there on the weekends. My thought was, I just instantly turned into a little kid. And I'm like, where's my mommy after experiencing this? So I go to my mom's room. I hear her bathwater going. I lay down on her bed. She comes out of the bath and she's completely surprised that I'm laying in her bed. She's like, what are you doing? Like, you haven't laid in my bed in years. And I tell her, I'm like, Mom, I seen a burglary and she explodes on me. She wouldn't let me finish. When her anger exploded, she said, what the heck were you doing around a burglary? You could get in trouble. When I start hearing these words, I know that the magnitude is much greater than the little bit I shared. So I climb up. I'm like, okay, I can't tell my mom. I can't tell nobody. So I go to my room and then I wake up to a loud gunshot. And this gunshot was all in my head, but it felt very real. I sit up. So I didn't know, but at the time I was experiencing trauma and I was reliving that trauma and it stuck with me for years, even though I wasn't identifying it. And even trauma prior to that from substance abuse and other violence, even though it wasn't as extreme as this day. So what happens is I get arrested and charged with first-degree murder. So under the law in California at this time is if you were around a dangerous felony and it results in somebody being killed, you could be held responsible, even if you were 14 years old. So because I was 15, I qualified to be charged for first-degree murder. Also at this time, your district attorney could file your case directly to adult court. So I never went to juvenile court, but I had the case filed directly to adult court. When I entered juvenile hall, I was still that kid from the community who had these aspirations of potentially being from the gang, potentially, I already was selling drugs at different points. Would I continue to do that? So those were my thoughts. Like, I didn't think I was in serious trouble. Although they booked me and said it was first-degree murder, my head kept telling myself, Mom will be here. My mom will be here. She'll be able to come save me. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just there, like, I'll be safe. But that's not how it was playing out. They were serious about the charge and they were serious about prosecuting me. They were also upset because I used my right to remain silent and I asked for a lawyer. So at that point, they started targeting me like I was a part of the gang. I was a part of the system. But a lot of the factors that went into that was our community dynamics that promoted that and that put your family in danger if you go against it. So that's what I was upholding, and it was also harming me. So when you get into juvenile hall, you spend a lot of time locked in your cell. The initial rule is 24 hours to let you clear out like of drugs or anything. But for me, it ended up being much longer because there's a rule that if you can't work out, you got to go to your cell. So I couldn't keep up with the push-ups. I couldn't keep up with the jumping jacks. I was using drugs for a long time, so I wasn't able to be physically as active, and I was being punished for it. So I spent a couple of weeks being sent to my cell every like workout period. And it was during one of these times, everybody made fun of me. They were like, "You're the weakest link. Go to your cell, haha," staff and my peers, that my mom was able to get her first visit with me. And I remember this first visit because we were high security. They would shackle you in waist and ankle chains. And they brought me down to a little round table, and I see my mom, and I'm crying. I cried every night of my initial incarceration, every single night, the biggest baby in the world. And at this point, I'd never been away from my mom for more than 24 hours. So she was pretty much who I was longing for. I was like in my mind, I was just a little kid wanting to be with his mom. So the first time I get to see my mom, I have to hug her like a dinosaur because my hands are down by my waist. And I expect my mom to be in tears, like, "Oh man, what just happened?" You know, they told her I was a first-degree murderer. She brought them to my friend's house where I was to arrest me. She tried to be with me during interrogation. They told her she couldn't. They made her wait in the police department until 3 a.m. and wouldn't give her information about anything. So she experienced her own version of the trauma. And she's coming to visit me, but she's confident. And she's like, "Don't worry about anything, baby. I'm going to get you a lawyer. Everything's going to be okay. You're going to come home." So again, at this point, I didn't feel like I had a will to overcome any of this. I was crying myself to sleep, but my mom brought in a will that was able to transfer onto me. So that when she gave me this bit of hope, I was like, okay. Matter of fact, she just broke it down to me that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be able to go to court and I can go home. Like, so I go to court and I don't go home. I get my case moved to adult court there was no oversight or like discretion. It was the district attorney's choice to have me in adult court. So that's where I ended up. So I wasn't going home. I was still a little sad. I still wasn't working out properly. So during one of those times, I couldn't do enough push-ups. They put me in the room. I decided to drink our liquid deodorant because I felt like I wanted to kill myself, but I didn't have a means to do it. I felt like banging my head in the wall would be too painful. So I drank the liquid deodorant. And at that age, you think everything's going to kill you. So I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to die. I'm done." I drank some liquid deodorant. So I tell the staff panic. They open the door. I start holding my breath to make my blood pressure go up. They send me to a hospital. It was at this community hospital in Riverside where I was on the other side of a curtain from an elderly couple. And while I'm sitting here taking life for granted, taking my youth for granted, using drugs and just leading like the wrong complete life as a kid and crying myself to sleep, you have an elderly couple who's at an end of life situation. You have a wife who's terminally ill and you have a husband who's consoling her. And you could just hear on the other side of the curtain, "Baby, baby." That's all she could say. And then you hear the husband saying, "It's going to be all right, baby. We're going to go to the place we always talked about." So just hearing him console his dying wife and hearing the doctors come in saying, "We can't do anything for her here. We can send her to Irvine. There's a specialty center there, but there's no guarantees. It doesn't look good. So you should just prepare." And hearing this and hearing the husband's strength, I was like blown away that my entire life, I never thought about you could die and it could be okay. It was mine and my friend's thought that if you died, it was over. It was like, you just die. You don't want to die. Try to stay alive. That's the thought. But then when you hear this family being consoled that it's okay to die, that you're going to a place and it's going to be okay, I wanted that. I started like thinking to myself, how could I acquire the strength that they have? Because I'm just a big baby. I have the rest of my life, even if I'm locked up. They're dying and they're happy. They might not be happy, but they're okay at the end of the day. To me, it transitioned as a sense of happiness because they spoke about their happy place as a happy place. So when I go back, I take that mindset with me and I take my first opportunity to go to church. And when I start going to church, I start seeing kids who have shot people, who are part of group gang murders, leading these church services with worship music and singing. And to me, these kids came from similar communities. They were exposed to similar circumstances. They decided to change their life in juvenile hall. They had already been there 2 or 3 years fighting their cases, and they were peer mentors, going to church, promoting peace, but everybody respected them. So when I started seeing this was another thing I wanted to adopt. Like, oh man, you can be positive and everybody still respect you. You don't have to follow the negative crowd. So as I was being exposed to these things in juvenile hall, it started changing my mind to where I wanted to be an active part of healing the community instead of my role that I played in hurting the community. The way this helped me is in my 3 years in juvenile hall, I went on to become a peer mentor myself. I never used drugs in juvenile hall. I smoked weed all the way up until that point, but in juvenile hall, you have a lot of pills you could take. Stop taking. I never took any of the pills, never stole any snacks that kids would steal other people's snacks. So I became a role model and was doing good. But that didn't mean I would get a chance to go home. So in school, our teacher, Shelly Smith, she guaranteed that every one of us that were leaving would get a high school diploma. And to me, I still was stuck at that third grade educational level where I learned how to read. I hadn't done much schooling past that. So I go in with a third grade education, and this teacher is like, you're going to get a high school diploma. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I'm smart enough. I don't know how it's going to work. I'm facing life in prison. But she guaranteed us. And by the time I turned 18 and was going to the adult system, I had a high school diploma. And getting that high school diploma told me that anything is possible. It's like, okay, you're facing life in prison. You turned 18. You get sent to the county jail, but you have a certificate and an accomplishment that nobody ever said you would have. Even our teachers gave us a statistic that said by the age of 22, 23, you would either be dead or incarcerated. They were right. I was incarcerated, but I got the high school diploma. So I felt like I had a leg up and I was going to overcome that statistic. In county jail, I was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder, and I was sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison. My co-defendant, who was 16, he pled guilty. He got life without parole plus 25 to life. My other co-defendant, who was from my neighborhood, who was 17, he pled guilty to testify against us. He got 13 years. So we're going to prison now. I changed my life. I got my high school diploma. I feel like I'm a mentor. I don't do drugs. I'm going to church. And I want to continue this in prison. But what happens is having a first-degree murder conviction, being young in the early 2000s, no one was treating you like you had a chance to come home. The system treated, no one was coming home at that time anyway. All lifers were staying in prison. You had our governors who were proud to keep individuals in prison. So that's the environment I went into. So my first prison was Pelican Bay, and it was on B Yard. And there's a lot of violence there against correctional officers, against each other. So it's really structured. Church kind of went away because church, you couldn't physically go. It had to be a pamphlet in your cell. And if you did manage to get to go, you would have to go through a search, which was uncomfortable to go to church. So church kind of went away. Education, I'm like, oh, just got a high school diploma. I want to go to prison and get a degree. I want to continue my education. I want to make my mom proud. Those opportunities weren't available. There was barriers in place of us, in place of our growth. And the way I managed was by exercising, trying to stay humble, not hurting other people. But I didn't have anything that would take me to the next level. All I had was morals. But I can say I am a Christian, but also you have to survive in any environment you're in. So if you do happen to be a really nice person, when you're in prison and somebody says you have to hold a knife, if somebody says, if we get into it with this race, you have to support us, you can't say, no, I'm not going to do that. Because I don't even think God would want you to do that. You're not supposed to sacrifice yourself. If you're a part of a group and a cohesive, you can have your morals and promote peace and positivity. But when an issue such as that in a prison and you're surviving occurs, it's okay, in my opinion, to function. And that's how I was able to function. I had to understand that I could potentially be violent if I had to be, because the rules in prison, especially level 4 yards, there's no fights. If you have an issue, it has to be a stabbing on our level 4s. So you have to have that mentality or you're not going to survive. So I wanted to survive, but I also, whenever one of those individuals came to me and said, Shawn, this guy said the N-word and he's going to get disciplined by the blacks if we don't do it. We need to go stab him. My advice to them would be like, you don't go stab him, because we have a conversation every day about how we want to help people. So you're going against our conversation, which at the end of the day is fake. So I understand everybody's pushing for that, but let's find another solution. So I would always advocate for a peaceful possible solution, even when there seemed like there wasn't one. So that was my way of playing my part of potentially doing good where it was really hard to do good in that environment. Thank God that I was able to survive my first 12 years of high security and go to a low security facility in R.J. Donovan down in San Diego. And it was at R.J. Donovan that that barrier to education was removed. Our campus, shout out, you could give applause for Southwestern College if you would like. So Southwestern College, Patrice Milikovic, Raquel Funches, they physically go to our local state prison and they remove that barrier of higher ed for us because the state, the correctional officers don't provide this education. Any other program providers don't provide it. Southwestern College comes in as an institution and opens up a door for residents because everybody in that prison is a resident of San Diego. They all have the opportunity to attend our community college if they have their high school diploma and they meet the criteria to take classes. So when they come to our yard, I'm like, this is amazing. Finally, that dream when I turned 18 and went to Pelican Bay of wanting to go to college is finally tangible. It's in front of me. So I meet Raquel and I meet Patrice, and I'm like, these are amazing human beings coming into our world. And I just told you that issues have to be resolved by stabbing. Everything is racially based. There's all these crazy structures. Even correctional officers could be abusive at times. And to come from that really rigid, dangerous, structured environment into a level 2 in Donovan, where they're offering colleges, it took a lot for the faculty from here to go into there and staff and trust us and support us and give us that opportunity. But it was the right thing to do, because one thing I could assure you of is every single person in a high security institution, a low security institution, in a county jail is just like you. If you were to unfortunately become incarcerated because you were the attention of law enforcement and they said, I want you to be incarcerated now, and there was a reason for them to do that, and you're in that jail, you're going to want safety, you're going to want food, you're going to want to talk to your family. Every single man, the most dangerous men in our state that were labeled the most dangerous that I've been with, all wanted safety, they all wanted good food, they all wanted to be with family. And if guys didn't have a family, they wanted to one day create a family. So that was what I experienced. And that's what I like to share with you all, is that we're just like everybody in there. So I got the opportunity. I worked towards my AA degree, and then a law change. There's a law change in California in 2020 that said you could no longer be convicted of murder unless you had the intention to hurt somebody. So I was ultimately released. So I went, thank you. So I went from being sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, resentenced to 9 years, time served for robbery. I served a total of 16 years from the age of 15 to 31. I paroled to San Diego. Thank God, San Diego is beautiful. I continued my education at Southwestern College with the Restorative Justice Program. Finished my AA degree, transferred to San Diego State. It was while at San Diego State that I met my beautiful wife, Maria, and I believe she's outside with Bella. And when I met my wife, now my life changed, because now I have somebody I connected with that my experience gets put into perspective, because the experience that I have of the long-term incarceration is like validated. Okay, you went through a lot. It was challenging. It was traumatic. But now at the end of it, you're supporting another human and we're bringing life into the world. So now I have my 2 beautiful daughters. I have Naima, shout out. She's a month chilling over there in the car seat. And then I have Bella running around somewhere being like her daddy. So now I have my 2 beautiful daughters that get to come into this world and I get to support. But how much of that would have been accessible to me without the advantage of having higher education in our prison and having those opportunities in the community? What happens is when you limit people from that, you're putting a barrier to their path to success. It could physically be you if you're the one making the choice to keep somebody from having access to these programs. And 95% of everybody who's incarcerated comes home. And another very important statistic is that we have research that the higher level of education individuals attain, the lower the recidivism rate is becoming. And we have a stat that says by the time an individual gets to a master's degree, there's a 0 recidivism rate in our state. So it tells us that that's no victims of crime once we get to a master's degree. And if our goal is to reduce the number of victims of crime in our community, we're doing more work towards that than a district attorney's office or a police department. No disrespect to those institutions, but if we're looking at numbers and the effect we're having, a community college, Southwestern College, has reduced the number of victims in San Diego in higher numbers and more efficiently when it comes to percentages than long-standing institutions that have promoted tough on crime policies and forget our neighbor policies. So ultimately, my mom was there at the gates when I first came home. She's still in my life. We have an amazing relationship. That support she gave me initially in juvenile hall gave me that will to keep going, because where there's a will, there's a way. And I've been in rooms where I was isolated for weeks with little clothing, no food, couldn't call my mom. but you're always going to remember that mom's voice in your head that everything's going to be okay. So regardless of what you go through, I know it may not be exactly similar, but the things in your life that you feel like are relatable, you could always fall back on where there's a will, there's a way. Where you have somebody in your life that has given you a will to keep going when it felt like there was no way forward. Because we always will get walls. It's just a part of life. But as human beings, we're so resilient, we will always get through it. You just have to take those steps, because you won't if you don't take those steps. So I just want to leave you with, the world is not as chaotic as it seems. There is order, and it's our responsibility, if we would like to improve the world, to find out what's leading to things seeming chaotic so that we could work to address it and have a better San Diego. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me. And I will open it up for questions. And we do have our handy dandy microphone person.
Are there any questions?
More of a comment. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm so happy. I'm like, oh, I just don't want to cry right now. But yeah, how does Southwestern help you, if you don't mind? Did they have counselors, or what was your experience with Southwestern as far as the education that you received? Did they give you counselors to higher education, or how was it?
Great question. So what happens is when you parole, you're the responsibility of parole. And then you just get forced somewhere. So initially I was forced to go to Riverside County homeless, but within 24 hours, I was calling Raquel, I was calling Patrice, and I said, hey, I'm one of your students. I just paroled. I'm being forced to go to Riverside, and I'm homeless. I have no family here. I was 15 when I left. They were able to get on the phone with their connections and find me housing in San Diego. So that was the first big step. They got me housing in San Diego, and also continuing my education. They brought me to campus. I got out a month before COVID shut everything down. So I had a meeting with a counselor, and I wish I could remember his name. He was so impactful, because that first meeting, and I would have never came to campus if it wasn't for Raquel or Patrice being able to bring me. But that initial meeting, he was able to structure what my presence at Southwestern would look like. He said, I could get you a part of conferences where you can share your academic journey. We could pay for you to go to different places around the country and stay in hotels and do presentations. I can introduce you to the basketball team. I spent years playing basketball in prison and would have loved to play athletics at the college. So it's like all these amazing opportunities were laid out for me, and it came about by being able to connect with Raquel and Patrice. And what they have is the insight to connect us with the mechanisms on campus that won't be barriers. Because the worst thing, when I first got out, I also reached out to Saddleback, and they did not have a Rising Scholars Program or Restorative Justice Program, and I got silenced when I submitted my application and reached out for support. But with Southwestern College, you got a lot of active response. So I would say that's how they benefited me initially, and even put me on a path to where now I'm happily employed by Irvine Valley College as a program coordinator. And I run a Rising Scholars Program, which is amazing. So that was the turnaround to that. Thank you for the question.
Shawn, on behalf of Cafe J, the Family Studies Department, and the Criminal Justice Department, we want to thank you for coming today. A token of our
Wow.
appreciation. Southwestern. Sweatshirt, something for you, and a tote bag.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your journey. Everyone, we want to invite you to have lunch outside. It's a beautiful day. You will find a survey in your tote bag. We'd like you to fill that out before you pick up your